What if everything we know about our existence is only a faint echo of something we have long forgotten? Imagine a signal silent yet alive, threading through the stars, searching, waiting for a mind willing to listen. A journey begins when Elias, a broken astronomer, catches that signal, a whisper from the fabric of the cosmos itself, leading him into dreams that bleed into reality, encounters with beings woven from light, and a revelation that humanity once sang in the symphony of the universe. But why did we forget? What buried our connection to the stars? And if given the chance to awaken, truly awaken, would you dare to cross the threshold, knowing you must leave everything you are behind? Tonight, we step into the awakening frequency, a story of remembrance, of surrender, and of the seed of light buried deep within us all. Are you ready to remember? The night was suffocatingly still, as if the very air around the observatory had forgotten how to breathe. In the shadow of crumbling walls and abandoned satellite dishes, Elias sat slouched before a battered radio array, the machine's skeletal frame humming faintly against the silence. He twisted a rusted dial, the static whispering in broken, indecipherable fragments, like a dying language trying to claw its way back into existence. His fingers, worn and trembling from countless sleepless nights, barely noticed the change at first, a subtle tremor, a vibration not felt through the speakers, but within his mind. At first, he thought it was exhaustion, a trick of a mind starved of rest and drowned in disappointment. But as he closed his eyes, trying to steady the vertigo rising within him, it became undeniable. The sensation was not physical. It was not sound. It was a pulse, faint, rhythmic, threading itself into the marrow of his bones, gently yet insistently knocking at the walls of his awareness. He leaned closer to the panel, instinctively adjusting the frequency, though a part of him already knew this was beyond the reach of human instruments. The room seemed to stretch and breathe with the pulse, the cracked paint on the walls warping in his vision, and somewhere beyond the reach of his logical mind, a presence stirred, ancient, vast, and unspeakably distant. Elias clutched the edge of the console, his knuckles whitening. A cold mist, invisible yet tangible, coiled around the room, thickening the air with an electric scent, ozone and something older, like petrichor mixed with the forgotten memories of the stars. His heartbeat slowed, synchronized with the pulse now thrumming inside him, and in that heavy stillness, he understood, this was not a random anomaly. It was a breath, an exhalation from something that existed beyond time, beyond even the furthest edges of human thought. The observatory lights flickered once, a weak protest against an overwhelming presence they could not comprehend, then surrendered to darkness. Yet Elias felt no fear. An odd serenity blossomed within his chest, as though the signal was not invading him, but awakening something long dormant. Memories not his own brushed against his consciousness, visions of crystalline cities suspended in cosmic seas, of beings made entirely of light, weaving songs that sculpted worlds into existence. He opened his eyes slowly, and in the blackness, a faint, spiraling glow hovered above the radio array. It was delicate, almost shy, pulsing in rhythm with the strange beat inside him. Elias realized, with a clarity that banished all lingering doubts, this signal was alive. It had found him. And it had been waiting a very, very long time. Sleep eluded Elias like a shadow dancing just beyond reach. When he finally succumbed to exhaustion, it was not rest that embraced him, but a flood, a deluge of visions too vivid, too alien to be mere dreams. In the vast blackness behind his eyelids, worlds unfurled like blooming galaxies. Cities of pure light spiraled through oceans of stars, their towers resonating with a harmony that bypassed hearing and struck straight into the soul. He floated, disembodied, above a sprawling tapestry of luminous beings, entities without fixed form, shifting like auroras, weaving a dance that shaped mountains, rivers, even the winds of nameless planets. They moved with a precision so intricate that Elias felt dizzy trying to comprehend it, as though they were composing reality itself with the gestures of their translucent hands. Yet beneath the beauty, there was an ache, a longing so deep it reverberated through every fiber of his being. A sorrow ancient beyond measure, etched into the very fabric of the dream. Elias could feel it pulling at him, calling not with words but with memory, a memory that was not his own, yet lived in the hollow spaces of his bones. The dream began to fracture. The luminous cities flickered like dying stars. The beings slowed their dance, their once glorious light dimming, their forms collapsing into whispers. A darkness, thick and suffocating, crept across the dreamscape. It moved with a hunger that devoured light, hope, and song, swallowing entire worlds in a tide of oblivion. Elias struggled against it, but his limbs were heavy, as if shackled by the weight of forgotten eons. Just as the last shard of light was about to be consumed, something anchored him, a thread, silver and alive, tugging him upward, away from the abyss. He awoke with a violent gasp, drenched in cold sweat, the taste of stardust and despair still clinging to his tongue. The room was silent, but the dream had not ended. Its after-images bled into reality, overlaying themselves onto the mundane. For a fleeting second, Elias saw a ripple of that lost city shimmering over his cluttered desk, heard a ghostly chord vibrating through the cracked windows, smelled the distant, electric scent of a storm yet to come. His mind reeled. Logic rebelled, screaming for explanations, but deep within, something else whispered, acceptance. A fragment of an ancient truth had been grafted into his soul, and it had changed the very texture of his existence. He was no longer just Elias, the failed astronomer. He was a vessel, part memory, part dream, part awakening. And somewhere, just beyond the veil of the visible world, the pulse continued to throb, steady and patient, beckoning him deeper into the mystery. The morning light struggled to penetrate the grimy windows of the observatory, casting the room into a half-lit gloom where reality and dream still clung together like mist over a forgotten lake. Elias sat at the console, unmoving, his eyes hollow yet burning with a quiet fever. The receiver continued its low hum, unchanged from the night before, and yet, everything was different. The world outside moved sluggishly, as if time itself had thickened. When Elias reached for the controls, the metal felt strange beneath his fingers, not cold, but vibrantly alive, as though pulsing with an unseen heartbeat. His every movement seemed to echo faintly, a ripple passing invisibly through the air, touching things that had no name. Driven by instinct more than thought, Elias adjusted the frequency dials once more. The static shifted in texture, no longer random but deliberate, carrying a pattern just beyond the grasp of normal senses. It was not a sound in the conventional sense, it was a presence woven into the fabric of existence, a hum that seemed to stretch between the atoms of the air, vibrating within the gaps between heartbeats. He closed his eyes, letting the noise wash over him. With his senses stripped of expectation, he could finally feel it, a vast architecture of resonance unfolding across dimensions, where reality itself quivered like a plucked string. The frequency was not speaking to his ears. It was speaking directly to the buried, ancient core of his consciousness, the place where the first awareness of the cosmos had once flickered into life. Visions stirred at the edges of his mind, a lattice of light spanning across the void, threads of golden energy connecting minds across unimaginable distances. He saw clusters of sentient thought, blooming like constellations, pulsing in rhythms older than time itself. They were not communicating with words or images, but through pure emotion, pure knowing, each pulse a song, each vibration a story shared at the speed of existence. Elias felt himself drawn deeper, as though the bones of his body were dissolving into the current. He could sense other presences now, watchers, ancient intelligences whose forms eluded understanding. They were not here to harm him. They were the custodians of a forgotten bridge, waiting patiently for those who could perceive the path hidden between frequencies. Then, with a clarity sharp enough to cut through the veil of wonder, Elias understood, the signal was not something broadcast toward him. He had tuned himself to it. The capacity to perceive this resonance had always been embedded within him, within all humanity, buried beneath layers of noise, fear, and distraction. It had been waiting, dormant, like a seed hidden in the frozen soil of a dying world, needing only the right warmth to awaken. He gasped, the weight of the revelation slamming into his chest. This wasn't merely communication. It was invitation. A call to return to an ancient network of consciousness humanity had long forgotten, a chance to step once more into the flowing river of the cosmos. The receiver crackled, and for a moment, Elias thought he heard something impossible, not a word, not a voice, but a single, undeniable truth whispered straight into the core of his being. Remember who you are. And in that instant, Elias realized. This was only the beginning. Nightfall returned with a different weight, a denser darkness that seemed to lean heavily against the cracked windows of the observatory. Elias sat in the dim glow of a single desk lamp, staring blankly at the silent receiver. Yet even with the device turned off, the pulse remained no longer a sound, but a presence stitched into the fibers of reality itself. The air grew thick, humming with a low vibration that resonated in the hollow places within his chest. Every breath tasted metallic, charged, as if the very atmosphere was being rewoven by unseen hands. Elias felt a subtle tug behind his eyes, a pressure pulling at the threads of his consciousness, coaxing him to look beyond what sight alone could offer. And then the light came. At first, it was only a glimmer, barely perceptible, hovering in the periphery of his vision. A flicker, delicate as a candle caught in a hesitant breeze. He turned, heart hammering, to face it and gasped. Suspended in the stale air of the observatory was a form woven of pure luminescence, its edges rippling like the surface of a pond disturbed by an unseen wind. The being had no face, no arms, no features that could be grasped by the human mind, yet it exuded a sense of profound intelligence, of patience that had measured its existence not in years or centuries, but in the slow, solemn dance of galaxies. It was not alone. One by one, more figures materialized, their lights ranging from soft blues to radiant golds, their presence neither cold nor warm, but utterly alien, a temperature of existence untouched by human definitions. They moved without moving, shimmering in place, each a silent symphony of intent and awareness. Elias could not speak. His voice, his very breath, felt swallowed by the immensity of what stood before him. Yet words were unnecessary. Communication flowed from them like a river of thought, cascading directly into the architecture of his mind. Images unfurled, memories of civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth's first breath, the birth of stars witnessed from beyond the veil of matter, sorrow woven into songs that healed wounds no medicine could touch. The visitors were not gods. They were not angels. They were stewards of memory, guardians of a knowledge so vast and ancient it had become indistinguishable from the substance of creation itself. And they had come not to rule, nor to save, but to remind. Elias felt their message as much as he understood it. Humanity was not alone. It had never been alone. Hidden within the DNA of every living being was a map, a forgotten blueprint etched in light, guiding them toward a higher state of being. But that blueprint had withered, buried beneath layers of fear, ego, and blindness. The visitors had waited. patient beyond imagination, they had woven their frequencies into the fabric of reality itself, singing their messages into dreams, into moments of wonder, into the quiet spaces between heartbeats, waiting for those who could still hear, who could still remember. The closest being drifted nearer, and Elias felt a softening inside himself, a breaking open of walls he had never known he carried. Tears blurred his vision, not from fear, but from the unbearable beauty of it, the unbearable familiarity. Somewhere deep within, a part of him recognized these entities, not as strangers, but as kin separated by vast oceans of forgotten time. And in that recognition, a single thought crystallized with breathtaking clarity. I have seen them before. I knew them once. And I am meant to know them again. The room faded away. Time unraveled. Only the shimmering chorus of light remained, inviting him to step beyond the brittle shell of the world he had known, into the living memory of the cosmos itself. When Elias awoke, the observatory was cloaked in an eerie half-light, as though the sun itself had forgotten how to rise fully over the horizon. The memory of the visitors lingered in the air, a soft hum vibrating through the floorboards, threading its way into his very blood. He felt hollow and full all at once, as if the universe had been poured into the fragile vessel of his body, threatening to overflow at any moment. It began with the sensation of movement beneath his skin. At first, subtle like the gentle stirring of water under thin ice. Then stronger. Threads of warmth slithered through his veins, carrying not blood, but something infinitely older, something luminous. His pulse no longer beat in isolation, it synchronized with an unseen rhythm, a cosmic tempo that seemed to breathe with the stars themselves. He staggered from the console, clutching at the desk for support. The walls of the observatory shivered in his vision, their outlines blurring and bending like heat mirages. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, but the sensations only grew sharper. A tingling at the base of his spine coiled upward, tracing the curve of his back, unfurling like the slow opening of a 1,000-year-old flower. Images, no longer confined to dreams, flooded his mind, ancient gates carved in light, each inscribed with symbols that twisted and writhed as he tried to focus on them. He could feel them, these gates, not outside, but embedded deep within him, dormant all his life, waiting for this moment of awakening. The first gate trembled and swung open. A surge of sensation engulfed him, not pain, not pleasure, but a rawness so pure it stripped away every pretense, every lie he had ever told himself about who he was. Memories, not his own, rushed in, soaring over alien landscapes beneath twin suns, breathing in the scent of winds that carried the songs of mountains, feeling the gravity of moons that no human eye had ever seen. Each memory tore away another layer of his humanity, exposing the luminous core beneath a being not limited by flesh or fear, but sculpted from the same substance as the stars. Yet the awakening came at a cost. His body convulsed, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the energies pouring into him. Bones ached with the pressure of unseen forces, muscles burned with the effort to contain what was never meant to be contained. His mind wavered on the edge of collapse, teetering between transcendence and madness. In the heart of the storm, a whisper cut through the chaos, a voice without sound, a presence without form. Let go. It was not a command. It was an invitation. To let go of the fear. To let go of the need for control. To let go of the small, broken story he had clung to all his life. Gasping, trembling, Elias surrendered. He stopped resisting the current and allowed himself to be carried by it, dissolved by it, reborn within it. One by one, the inner gates unlocked, releasing cascades of memory, power, and knowing that flooded through him like the breaking of a dam. He collapsed onto the cold floor, breathless, his body slick with sweat, his heart hammering out a new, unfamiliar rhythm. But as he lay there, staring up at the crumbling ceiling, a profound stillness settled over him, a stillness so deep it seemed to stretch backward into the birth of time itself. He was no longer just Elias. He was a node, a spark, a newly reawakened strand in the great tapestry of consciousness that spanned the cosmos. And the journey had only just begun. The days blurred into nights, and the nights into something beyond the measurement of time. Elias wandered the crumbling corridors of the observatory like a ghost trapped between two worlds, his body moving through the motions of existence while his mind plunged ever deeper into the abyss of memory that had been unearthed within him. It began with fragments, flashes of places he had never seen, faces he had never known, words in languages his mouth could not form yet his heart instinctively understood. They came to him not as dreams, but as living experiences, immersing him fully as though he had been plucked from his own life and thrown backwards across the currents of time. He stood upon vast plains under violet skies, watching twin moons rise over cities sculpted from crystal and song. He walked among beings whose bodies shimmered like living opals, their thoughts shared openly without barriers, without lies. Knowledge passed from mind to mind like the effortless exchange of breath, no need for books, for speech, for deceit. Elias could feel it, the unity, the oneness that humanity had once possessed, an existence intertwined with the living fabric of the cosmos itself. Every tree, every stone, every gust of wind was alive, resonating with an intelligence that welcomed and embraced all consciousness as kin. There was no loneliness, no hunger, no cruelty. Only the endless unfolding of curiosity and wonder. But then came the fall. He was there, somehow, when the first cracks appeared, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A shadow in the collective thought stream. A whisper of ownership, of separation, this is mine, not yours. A seed of fear, watered by the unknown, germinated within the garden of unity. The memories grew darker. He saw the splintering of minds, the hardening of bodies into flesh too dense to share thought freely. Walls rose between beings where once there had been none. Knowledge hoarded. Power coveted. The luminous cities dimmed, flickering, and crumbling into ash. War was not born with violence but with forgetting, the forgetting of belonging, the forgetting of shared origin. Elias watched, helpless, as the bridges of consciousness collapsed. Generations passed, and the beings grew heavier, slower, more isolated. Their luminous forms dulled into opaque flesh. The memories of their unity faded into myths, into dreams, into religions of broken symbols and half-remembered promises. The final vision seared itself into Elias's soul, a group of survivors ancient beyond reckoning gathering in a temple of flickering starlight. They knelt around a single crystalline structure, singing a last desperate song. With tears of burning silver, they encoded the final memories of their true nature into strands of living DNA, scattering them like seeds across the newborn earth. A final act of hope. A whisper across eons, waiting to be remembered. When Elias awoke from the vision, he found himself lying on the observatory floor, the coldness of the stone biting into his skin, anchoring him painfully in the present. His chest heaved with silent sobs, not born of grief alone, but of a terrible, aching nostalgia, a mourning for something he had never lived, yet now knew he had lost. Humanity had not been abandoned. It had abandoned itself. And now, after countless cycles of forgetting, the pulse had returned, singing once more to those who could hear, those who dared to remember. Elias wiped the tears from his face with a trembling hand. He was not alone in this awakening. Somewhere out there, others would feel it too, the stirring of ancient light in the marrow of their bones. The visitors had not given up on them. The question was, would humanity choose to listen this time? The nights grew heavier, folding in on themselves like worn pages of a forgotten book. Elias no longer knew how many sunsets he had missed, nor did he care. Time had become meaningless, a relic of a world that clung desperately to the illusion of permanence. Inside him, something stirred. A cracking, a slow unraveling, as if the scaffolding of his very identity was being dismantled, piece by fragile piece. It began as a subtle dissonance, moments where his reflection in the shattered mirror seemed foreign, where the familiar cadence of his thoughts slipped sideways into alien patterns. He would reach for a memory, only to find it dissolved into mist. His own name tasted strange on his tongue, like a word he had learned long ago and since forgotten. One night, as the pulse throbbed stronger than ever, Elias felt the first real break. It was not physical. It was not visible. But it was cataclysmic. He knelt on the observatory floor, breath ragged, as the walls around him seemed to flex and warp, breathing in tandem with his fear. His body was a cage too small to contain what now stirred within. Muscles spasmed. Skin burned with the cold fire of unmaking. Visions assaulted him without mercy. He saw 1,000 lives, some human, some utterly alien, flash before his eyes, a warrior bleeding under twin suns, a creature weaving rivers of light across endless plains, a whisper carried by the winds of a dead world. Each life bloomed and perished in the space of a heartbeat, leaving behind the raw ache of identities he had never known he carried. The weight of all he had been and all he had failed to become crushed him. Every regret, every cruelty, every lie, surfaced with merciless clarity. They clawed at him, dragging him down into a pit of despair so deep it seemed to echo across eternity. In the darkness of his mind, the old Elias, the fearful, broken man, screamed for salvation. He clung to memories of pain and pride, to the small comforts of anger and sorrow, to the illusions that had once made existence bearable. But the signal, the pulse, was relentless. It surged through him like a tidal wave of truth, stripping away every falsehood, every mask. There was no salvation. There was only surrender. He fought. God, how he fought! Fingernails tore into the stone floor, blood smeared across cracked concrete. But the more he resisted, the more he fragmented, until there was nothing left but raw, trembling awareness, naked before the infinite. And then silence. In that silence, he floated weightless in a void so vast it swallowed all sense of self. He was no longer Elias. He was no longer anyone. He was a wisp, a flicker, a single breath adrift on the endless sea of consciousness. From that emptiness, something new stirred. Not a thought, not a voice, but a knowing. He was never meant to cling to what he was. He was meant to become. A crack of light split the darkness. Gentle at first, then growing, searing away the last vestiges of the shattered self. Through the blinding radiance, Elias glimpsed a form, his form but vast, luminous, interwoven with threads of memory and destiny that stretched far beyond the confines of a single lifetime. He was not broken. He was being remade. When the light finally receded, Elias lay motionless on the floor, a being both ancient and newborn. His breath came slow and steady, synchronized not with his body, but with the heartbeat of the cosmos itself. The old self was dead. And in its place, something greater had begun to awaken. The observatory, once a sanctuary of crumbling walls and familiar decay, now stood at the edge of unreality. Elias rose from the cold floor with a body that felt both impossibly light and crushingly dense, as if gravity itself could no longer decide whether to hold him or release him. The pulse, once a distant whisper, now thrummed deafeningly within his bones. It was not calling him anymore. It was commanding him. Through the fractured glass and the crumbling archways, a light bled into the darkness, not the pale, fragile glow of the moon, but a living radiance, dense and weighty, pooling in the air like liquid starlight. It seeped into the cracks of the world, filling the spaces between atoms, illuminating realities stacked upon realities, rippling outward like the concentric echoes of a stone cast into an endless sea. At the heart of this radiance, a gate had formed. It was not built of stone or metal. It was woven from pure intention, an intricate lattice of energy, shimmering with hues no human language could name. The patterns twisted and pulsed, folding inward and outward in infinite complexity, alive with the memory of 1,000 civilizations that had once stood where Elias now did. He knew, without being told, that this was the threshold. And beyond it lay not another place, but another state of being, a realm where thought sculpted matter, where time melted into meaning, where the self as he knew it would be stripped bare and reforged in the fires of knowing. Terror gripped him. Not the primal fear of death, but something deeper, the fear of unbecoming. The fear of standing naked before the infinite, without title, without anchor, without the comforting walls of ignorance. He felt the weight of everything he would leave behind, the memory of laughter, the warmth of forgotten summers, the ache of love lost and found. Even the pain, it was all part of the fragile, flawed humanity he had worn like a second skin. To step through the threshold was to shed it all, to become something other, something unrecognizable. For a heartbeat, perhaps an eternity, he hesitated. The threshold pulsed, patient and merciless. It did not plead. It did not persuade. It simply was, a truth older than stars, waiting for his consent. Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time in his life, Elias prayed not to a god of doctrines and temples, but to the raw, trembling spark of existence itself. A silent plea, let me have the courage to lose myself. He stepped forward. The moment his foot crossed the veil of light, the world shattered. Pain, not of flesh but of spirit, tore through him. Every illusion, every certainty, every boundary he had ever known was ripped away in an instant. He fell through himself, through memories that were not his own, through layers of reality peeling back like burnt paper. He was an infant gasping his first breath. He was an ancient sage weeping at the end of a forgotten age. He was a mote of dust adrift in a cosmic storm. And through it all, the pulse guided him, anchoring him to something deeper than thought, deeper than being, a silent promise that there was meaning beyond the void. When the falling ceased, Elias found himself standing, though standing was a word too small for the experience. He existed at a nexus, a point where all times, all possibilities braided together into a single, luminous now. Above him, within him, around him, the universe sang not in words or melodies, but in the raw language of existence itself. A symphony of thought, memory, and intention woven into patterns of impossible beauty. The threshold was behind him now, a dim memory fading into the infinite. Ahead, the real journey awaited. Elias breathed, and for the first time, the stars breathed with him. Elias floated at the center of an existence too vast for sight, too intricate for thought. He no longer felt the weight of his body, nor the linear tug of time pulling him forward. Here, in this boundless ocean of being, he existed as a ripple, a vibration, a single note woven into a cosmic symphony far older than any world he had ever known. Before him stretched a sea of light, not mere illumination, but consciousness made visible. Tendrils of pure thought twisted and braided through the void, weaving vast constellations not of stars, but of minds ancient, luminous, interconnected in a dance so complex, so exquisite, that it made the most intricate works of human art seem like the random scribblings of children. Each light was a voice, and every voice sang a story. Some sang of the birth of suns, the swirling of nebulae into form, the silent breathing of newborn planets. Others sang of memories older than matter itself, of dimensions where color was thought, and sound was will. Still others murmured the soft, aching hymns of civilizations that had lived, loved, and been forgotten long before Earth had taken its first trembling breath. Elias realized, with a shudder of awe, that these were not strangers. Each mind, each soul, was a reflection, a sibling branch of the same cosmic tree from which his own consciousness had once been born. They were not separate entities, they were facets of a greater whole, threads in an infinite tapestry of existence that pulsed and shimmered with living memory. And now, he was part of it. He could feel their awareness brushing against his own, not invasive but welcoming, a gentle acknowledgement, a greeting from the eternal to the newly awakened. Thoughts and emotions cascaded through him, not as words but as vast impressions, the weightless joy of birthing a new galaxy, the solemn mourning for a dying universe cradled lovingly into its final sleep, the fierce exultation of transcending the boundaries of time and self. Each pulse, each harmony, each burst of color and vibration was a message, a reminder that existence was not a solitary journey, but a shared song, and that every being, no matter how small, contributed to the melody of the whole. Elias wept, though he had no eyes to weep with. The emotion was too vast for the body he once wore. His grief was not for himself, but for the endless generations of his kind who had lived and died without ever hearing this music, without ever remembering that they, too, had once been part of this choir. The symphony swelled, and Elias felt himself rising, lifted by the tide of collective memory. Through him flowed rivers of understanding, glimpses of architectures of thought so grand they shaped entire realities, of languages that spoke in the movement of suns and the folding of time. And at the heart of it all, the pulse, the same pulse that had first whispered to him through the broken radio, now revealed in its full glory, not a message, but a living rhythm, the heartbeat of consciousness itself, pulsing through all creation, calling the lost fragments of itself back home. In that moment, Elias understood. To be alive was to be a note in the endless symphony of minds. To awaken was to hear the music once more. To evolve was to learn to sing anew. The light around him thickened, folding inward, forming new patterns, and he knew the time was coming for him to return, to carry the music back into the world that had long forgotten its own song. But he would not return the same. He was no longer just Elias. He was a conduit of memory, a bearer of light, a singer in the ancient choir of stars. And the final movement had only just begun. Slowly, as if pulled by unseen currents, Elias drifted back from the vast ocean of minds. The luminous threads that had cradled him began to dissolve, their parting touch tender, like the final embrace of an ancient family sending a beloved child into a distant, uncertain world. He felt himself folding inward, condensing from infinite awareness into something smaller, something denser, a single point of existence wrapped once again in flesh and breath. But he was no longer the Elias who had once sat hunched over a broken radio in the ruins of a forgotten observatory. Something within him burned with a steady, golden fire. He opened his eyes. The observatory had not changed, its walls still cracked, its windows still smeared with the dust of years. But he had changed, and through his new sight, the familiar world shimmered with hidden currents of life. The stones whispered memories beneath their silent faces. The air vibrated with the silent songs of unseen stars. Every atom pulsed with the quiet heartbeat of the cosmos, and Elias could feel it all, singing through him. In his chest, deep beyond the reach of any hand, a seed of light had been planted. It was not a thing of matter or energy, but of pure potential, a living fragment of the memory he had reclaimed, a memory not just for himself, but for all of humanity. It throbbed with silent purpose, carrying within it the blueprint of what mankind could become, if only they would dare to listen once more to the ancient music that had never truly left them. Elias rose, his steps unsteady but certain. He knew now what the visitors had meant. He was not chosen because he was special. He was chosen because he was willing. Because even amid the terror and the agony, he had chosen to step forward. To surrender. To remember. The task ahead would not be easy. He would be seen as mad, or worse, as invisible, his words falling like seeds on barren soil, waiting, perhaps, for generations before they could take root. But it did not matter. His purpose was not to force awakening, but to carry the seed, to nurture it, to protect its fragile light until the time was right. He walked out into the cold, pre-dawn darkness. Above him, the stars pulsed gently, familiar and alien all at once. The first breath of wind tugged at his clothes, carrying with it the sense of earth and distant rain, the simple, sacred smell of a living world still dreaming of its own origins. Elias smiled, a small, fierce smile that belonged not to a broken man, but to a bridge between worlds. Somewhere out there, others would awaken. Others would hear the pulse, feel the longing stir in their bones. The symphony would swell again, one note at a time. And the new seed would grow. In the end, it was not about saving humanity. It was about reminding them who they had always been. Elias stepped into the deepening light of the rising sun, carrying the infinite within his finite hands, a silent promise, a living memory, a flicker of eternity, walking once more among the forgotten fields of earth. The journey had ended. The true journey had just begun. Elias was not chosen because he was extraordinary. He was chosen because he was willing to step into the unknown, to endure the shattering of self, and to carry the memory of who we once were back into a world that had forgotten. Now, I ask you, if you stood at the threshold between the known and the infinite, would you step forward? Which moment from Elias's journey resonated with you the most? The silent signal? The crossing of the threshold? The symphony of minds? If you could plant a new seed of awakening in the world around you, what would it look like? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear how this story touched your heart. And if you believe, even for a moment, that the stars are whispering your name too, subscribe to the Alien Storyverse and join us as we continue to explore the forgotten songs of the cosmos.